I'm in a
All
breakdown
right.
and it feels amazing.
What? Well, what's the breakdown? What's
Um,
actually going on?
well, what Tyla said to me was really powerful. She said, the bigger we play, the more breakdowns that will
Mm.
happen. So like it's just about like owning them and being reminded what we're committed to. So the breakdown I'm in is around time. And I had a call this morning. I kind of stacked my morning. And I had a call right at 9:30 that the person was not on time for, which means that we needed 30 minutes to talk. So because they were late, like 9 minutes late, then I then needed extra time to
Mm.
close out the conversation.
Mm.
And it's interesting because I wasn't quite sure. Like intuitively, I knew that I needed more time, but I didn't say I needed more time until the time that I needed it. Does that make sense? So I could have messaged you at like 9:40 and said, "Hey, I'm gonna be 10 minutes late," but I messaged you at in my fear of like the breakdown. I messaged you at like 9:59 and was like, "I need 10 more minutes," and so I was like in anxiety and panic versus like actually like creating the space when I knew I needed it on the front end.
Mm.
And but that goes to everything because clearly I needed more space between things to buffer so that I wouldn't necessarily be in breakdown. So it just has me looking at my schedule differently about like how I
Mm.
can leave room for myself and for breakdowns because we're all
Mm.
gonna have breakdowns. So
Wow.
yeah.
It's really interesting, and I realize we haven't even gotten into the podcast yet, but we're just here rolling. Man, I'm so curious around um uh like what was the thing that you were unwilling to do to keep yourself in integrity?
Why would you ask me that question? You know what I'm unwilling to do. You know what I'm unwilling to do? Look bad. It's always
Mm,
always the thing. That's always the thing.
nice.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting, and look, I have no judgment around it, but what's interesting is that you were more open to looking bad here than you were with that person that was late 10 minutes in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So I'm curious, like and like, I think this is awesome. Like I have my own version of this, but like what's available here that you didn't think was available in that conversation?
I would say grace and maybe
Mm.
trust. Um, my first instinct was to email them and say, like it was like 9:35, and I even said this to myself. I said if he doesn't get on by 9:40, I can't have this conversation right now. And I emailed him at like 9:35 and was like, "Hey, is this time still work for you?" And then he jumped on at like 9:41, but didn't email back. And so at that point, I could have said, "Hey, you know what? I actually need to reschedule now because I have a 10 o'clock and I feel like we're gonna go over."
Mm.
And I had never met this person before in my life. Like this was our first call. Um, so like all of the scaries, right? Like going after
Amazing.
me.
Amazing. Like it's like so much more willing to piss off the person that like you love and care about and like are in a
Yes.
relationship and not the person that like you haven't even gotten out of
Clearly has
conversation
I
with.
have no relationship with.
How perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
How perfect is that for us that like I could speak for myself, right? Like I get a new client or something like that. I'm more willing to piss off somebody that I love and trust than I will like hold the integrity of like whatever. I'm more willing to cause more breakdowns for myself, which is really to me this is really a conversation between me and me, because in the end of the day, like I'm the one that's in the impact of every single thing.
Yeah.
That person you spoke to this morning is going on with their
Yeah.
day, doing whatever, like maybe not in the impact. So I just really think it's, talking about it through the lens of intention. Like when we don't directly set intentions, we can by default create an intention. And for you, and even for me, sometimes the intention is, I just don't want to look bad. Like that's the story that we're empowering. And as a result, we get to be in the experience of a breakdown. And I think for you, you're like, it's great because I get to see it.
Yeah. Yeah. I get the
But
so I was like,
now that you see it, now what?
yeah, I keep thinking like, what could I have done to have it go differently? And it really goes back to leaving space. It really goes back to like honoring. It's multi-layered because in my head, I scheduled this meeting first, and then we talked about having the episode, and I scheduled it right after because I was like, well, if it's later in the day, you know, I have like the power group is at 11:30. That's like really tight, and so just me with time. Remember we were having that conversation with the doctor about when to do the episode, and I kind of was like on the fence, and then eventually I was like, no, this is not a good time. Something that happens is that I'm liable to do is that I'll only be able to do that like one time. So it's like being able to like stand for my schedule more than one time. Like I'll do it once and be like, okay, I did it. And then like go back to being like, yes, 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 whenever you want to have access to me. Like that's totally fine. Rather than continuously looking at it and being like, no, I need this space here for this, you know, these things. So that's what I'm taking away is the continuous standing. And I think that is really important as it ties into intention and like what we're committed to, because if my intention is to be able to say that I stood for my schedule, then I will only do it one time. But if my intention is to stand for my schedule or my space or the boundaries that I need to actually be in integrity with myself, then I'm going to show up a different way.
Yeah, cool. Well, what I got out of what you shared is like an intention can become a one-time thing on a case by case basis. And when you set the intention, you're more likely to follow through. And when you don't set the intention, your survival self, your defense mechanisms have their own way of setting their own intentions, or might I say, not setting their intentions, right? And what I hear is that, wow, man, what I love about this conversation, I think people are going to get to understand this as time goes on. So last time we talked about vision as like this core foundation for what we're bringing. Today we're talking about intention, and in the very, very near future, we're going to be talking about commitment. And what I think is awesome about how they all tie together is like vision gives us access to see where we're going. Intention has us make the choice by choice by choice for how we want to show up in the world, how I want to show up in the world. And commitment is the thing that anchors it into a practice. Because if it only becomes this case by case thing, like for me, it's like, imagine all the work where if I have to work so hard to say what my intention is on a time by time basis. And I think it's valuable as you're building the muscle, but at a higher level, it's like, what's my commitment? Like if I operate from my commitment, then my intention is almost like fixed about who I'm willing to be in a certain situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. So I just want to say that again for everybody. So if I operate from my commitment, then my intention is who I'm willing to be in any given circumstance, right? Is that what you said?
Well, yeah, your intention ends up, in this case, I think your intention, I mean, this could get a little bit messy and wordy, but whatever, we're just kind of working with it. It's like the intention becomes, like right now you're practicing intention, you're practicing saying who you're going to be in your relationship with time.
Yep. Yeah.
Right. I'm not going to do the punch card where I go to the coffee shop and I'm going to punch one and then I'm never going to use the punch card again. Like the practice here is to actually maintain and use the punch card until it's full so that you actually get the free whatever it is at the end. And I see that like once intention is practiced long enough, it sort of becomes like who you are. Like because it's so, it starts to outweigh the like the default intentions or the things that are the subconscious thoughts that are going underneath the surface.
Yeah.
So,
Or if maybe it's even lack thereof, right? Because I feel like intention is a choice, whether it's perceived to be positive or negative. And I think that the anything that's subconscious is like automatic, right? It's pattern. So like what just happened was pretty much automatic. Like it's what I'm liable to do when I'm not paying any attention, when I'm not putting forth any intention, right? It's just like the breakdowns just show up. And you know, when I think about like my intention around integrity, about being in integrity, and it's not just with time, but in my relationships, then that will have me be different. It will have me be thoughtful. It will have me be like aware. It will have me be specific and communicative, right? Because the breakdown happens when we don't know. So for us, for example, it wouldn't necessarily have been as big of a breakdown if you knew 20 minutes before I needed 10 more minutes, that I needed 10 more minutes. That's where the difference can be. Because, I said something earlier. My automatic is to look good. So I don't know that that's it's like deeply ingrained. It could be considered intention, but like, it's more of like a default. It's like a muscle that's already trained, is like to look good. So how does that show up? Often wait until the last minute to tell people I'm going to be late, or stack meetings without telling people that I can't do them, or take on projects that I can't fully show up for, whatever the case is. Whereas my actual intention is to be like a powerful force of light, inspiration, and joy in the world. And in doing that, it shows up in partnership. It shows up in a meeting with a person for the first time. It'll show up in my work. And so when choosing that, right, when choosing to be that joy, that light, then I wouldn't necessarily do things that would put me into places of shame. Because it doesn't necessarily have to be there just because the breakdown exists. There doesn't have to be shame.
yeah.
And so
I'm curious
Go ahead.
for you, if you actually activate that now, like you set that intention right here, right now on this call, showing up as joy and light and celebration, like how is that going to impact the call from here forward?
We're going to celebrate the fact that we're here right now, EP003, that we've launched, and that we're able to actually go really deep into these ideas and work through them. Yeah.
Cool.
And I get to own that I was 10 minutes late, and that's not what I'm committed to. I'm committed to us starting on time, having powerful conversations, and then releasing them for the world to experience and transform through.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Well, I really acknowledge the willingness to be in it and move through it. I know part of my default is to simply operate on top of it. It's like, oh, I was late, no big deal, or I'm super stressed about the other person. And so it's in the space. And so even if I'm not consciously looking at it or prodding it, it's like this itch on my back that, gets in the way of me being in integrity and being in connection and all that stuff. So I applaud and acknowledge the vulnerability to show up here and being recorded and just being in this partnership. And allowing even our audience to be in our own mess. Because I would assert that we do a lot in the world. I do a lot in the world. You do a lot in the world to keep people from seeing our mess. I mean, growing up, for me, you know, my family was like, everything's together. Everything's always together. And I'm like, is it? I can't and it started to like confuse my mind. I'm like, is it together? Is it not? And the impact on me is that when things weren't perfect or things weren't together, like I really felt the impact. So my default, speaking of what you were sharing, my default is around, you know, thinking that something a problem, something needs to be fixed, something's wrong if it's not absolutely perfect, joyful, like earthquake on the seismic scale is like -2, like the meter's not moving at all. So absolutely awesome. And everybody, if you've been listening this long for the last 17 minutes or so, welcome to Gentlemen, the #1 podcast for open-hearted leadership, where we have conversations just like this that allow us to be with the real of the real, what it's like to be in a brand new partnership, to screw it up, to own it, to move on, and to actually really create breakthroughs out of acknowledging our breakdowns and our own mess. Like, I am so excited. Like, what I'm really celebrating about this podcast is that I don't have to look good. I mean, I'm kind of trying, but like I just, like, I don't have to be perfect. And I think that's just like really evident in this conversation. So, and it is episode 3, so really excited. But Jason, what are you celebrating?
I'm celebrating today's episode. I'm celebrating intention, on so many levels, because we had an intention to launch a podcast, and I also had an intention to fund a $35,000 Kickstarter in the same time frame.
And you did.
And I actually did it.
Week.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, this has all happened. This has all happened. Like, this whole last 6 weeks has been super powered, honestly. And there's a lot of support. And that's how I did it. You know, my intention was to do these things, and my intention was also to not do them alone. And I got so much support. I asked for so much support, and so many people showed up, and it was amazing. It's been really amazing. So that's what I'm celebrating.
That's so cool. Well, and I really get that all of the things, what you said is, how can I possibly declare and launch a podcast? Literally, I think within 24 to 48 hours of when your Kickstarter was completing. Like, how can I actually create this thing over here and create this? And I think, like, for me, I probably would have backed off. I probably would have been like, there's no way. Like there's something in what's possible would have worked against me in that situation. But what I love about intention is that intention is a statement of intention or a declaration that is outside of knowing how. I think as people, me, you, we get stuck in the how before we're willing to say, I want this thing by this time.
Yeah.
And what we were able to do in this case is go, actually, I'm going to declare that we're going to launch this podcast before we even know how it's going to go, before we even know who the guests are going to be, before we actually really have the tech completely figured out. You being in Los Angeles, I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. We had Adam on from last week in New York, and then we have Nicholas, who's coming on the air next week, who's in Austin. Like, how do you actually tie all of these people together? And you said it anyway. And what I'm really present to is that by you speaking it into existence, by you saying that it will happen, that you want it, is that we took on what was needed to create it.
Yeah.
And we did.
Yeah. And the other thing is that we were able to put off both of our perfection muscle for it.
Yeah, looking good.
Yeah,
perfection.
Good. Yeah, because
my gosh,
because I think that was a really big piece of it. I remember when I tried to back out. I was like, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can do this. And I remember, okay, so this is something else I'm liable to do. So I remember what happened was, like, the first you had a breakdown, and there was overwhelm, and then after your overwhelm, I was overwhelmed. But this is the power of partnership. Everyone who's listening, is that when Jeff got recentered to what we were committed to, and what our intention was for the date, and like all of that, he actually wouldn't allow me to fall into my pattern. So he held me, and this is a form of support too, holding me accountable for what we said we were going to do, and say we don't have to know how, and it also doesn't have to be perfect. So how do we move forward from there? And that definitely allowed me to like surrender to whatever we needed to do. We just kept I think in being intentional about the timeline, and what we'd set out to do. It just made it easy. It made it really easy to like get up and record at 8 a.m. And I mean, we had the first episode was like amazing. I was like drinking my little tea, and then Adam came on, and it was just breezy. Even the listening process, like the listening back process, was really easy to pull from. So yeah, it's interesting. And so I think that celebrating support is something that's really, really important here, because there were multiple places that I was trying to play big, and I knew that to play big, you need a team. You need someone that's willing to hold you as your highest self, and support you during the breakdowns, and remind you of like who you are. So,
man, I love what you just said about holding people at their highest self. Like, how many times do you have the experience with friends and family where you kind of share they're going to do something, or somebody says they're going to do something and then they don't, and they're just kind of like, that's just kind of who they are. It's like what they do. Like they let them off the hook. And I think for me, there's this opportunity to learn how to hold people to what they say from a place of love. I think letting people off the hook in certain situations is a way of really not believing in who people are, their absolute greatness. So I think for me, in that moment that you're sharing, I had an opportunity, and I chose the uncomfortable one, which is like to call you out and say, just the way you did the week before for me, is like to call you out and stand and be like, you know what? We could push it. We could let it off. But I noticed that we're in a conversation about, we're in breakdown. And I'm like, we're not actually in breakdown. We're just relating to ourselves as like we're in breakdown when we're not. And if we totally shift the conversation, if we totally shift our intention about who we want to show up as, then, and really get connected to our vision. Because I think that's the thing that made it so that I could stand for you in that moment, is I got present to what this is all about.
Yeah.
I got present to this vision of us, how flat would this podcast fall if we let ourselves off the hook from operating from our vision and our intention. So my intention, and that was like my intention, however this goes, is to stand for Jason and relate to him as his greatness. Because I know what's going to happen if I relate to myself as my breakdown, if I relate to myself as my survival self, and I relate to Jason as his survival self, I know what's going to happen. It's going to be April 1st, and we're going to be launching a podcast, and that's not actually what we said. So I think the continued practice for me, and the invitation to anybody that's listening is, you always have a choice. You always get to choose in that moment. Leadership is a moment to moment choice. And as soon as you think you've passed the moment, you're in a new moment, and you get to choose again as to who you want to be, who you want to show up, who you want to hold yourself as, and who you want to show, and who you want to hold other people as. And Jason, like, even like hearing that, I'm curious, if you're willing, like how that would have shifted your conversation, just to circle it back around, how that would have shifted your conversation with this person this morning. Like, how would it have shifted the conversation in the way that you showed up? How would it have changed the narrative of the conversation? How do you think that that would have actually impacted your day had you actively chosen in that moment?
Yeah, I think in that moment I would have chosen actually to set the boundary. I mean, we talk about this a fair amount in our power group, but like not saying that I have a hard stop at 10. But even though that's when the schedule says like it's a 9:30 to 10 call, and so it just needs to stop at 10. So, but even that's cutting it close. So it would have actually need to end at 9:55. So in that moment, I would have chosen to not have the call. Like I would have just moved it to another day. Because, and I didn't see this before, and I'm only seeing it now, that there was no way I could have been in integrity having both things scheduled in that space. So either way, I would have needed to be, there would have been a breakdown at some point because I would have gotten on at 10:01 or 10:02, or I would have gone over. So yeah, so I think the choice would be to set the boundary before I hit the breakdown. Yeah.
And so, and what I hear is, so now there's an opportunity, and like anything, you know, and I know that probably our next episode, I'm going to be in the hot seat. So I'm totally looking forward to it. But, you know, Jason and I are committed in this partnership to be super real, to be super open, to be very vulnerable, because we believe that these are the conversations that make a difference, that people get to hear themselves in these conversations and they go, oh yeah, I do that. Wow. I didn't know that that's the impact that I was having, or I didn't know that's the feedback that I'm giving people. And it's not actually who I want to be known as, because actually who I am, like who I know you to be, is leader. You are loving, you are generous, you are compassionate, you are powerful, you are fierce, you are creative. Like all of these are who I hold you as. And so if we all relate to ourselves as that person all the time, if that becomes our intention and our commitment is to hold ourselves as our highest and best, my assertion is that life changes. And not because it's hard work, not because it's like painful, but it's actually because we're speaking our truth in the moment. We're not trying to control everybody else, or sort of even like pre-control. Ever get into a conversation where your intention, you're like, my intention is to get what I want, but my other intention is that I also don't want to create a conflict because I know my partner gets pissed when I do this thing. So actually your intention steers, your energy steers, and more of the energy gets focused on the thing that you don't want. And what happens when that happens? Like for you, like how does it go?
That that I don't know that I have an exact example, but if my intention is to get what I want, but my I actually don't know that I can have the intention of not causing conflict, because part of it is like, how far are you willing to go is always the question. And so if my stop is conflict, I'm not going to get very far. If my stop is like discomfort, then I'm taken out of the gate. So I think on the other hand, like we have to be willing to get uncomfortable. And so even something else I see here is like, it was uncomfortable for me to come on and be late and then talk about it. But it also needed to happen. It had to happen so that the awareness could be there, so the shift could happen, so that I could be reminded of what I'm committed to. And that's why I was saying earlier about like, the bigger you play, sometimes the more breakdowns you have, because it can't be about being perfect. It's about owning the breakdowns and like looking at where I can shift things so that I can play more powerfully in the spaces that I want to play in. And also know that like my schedule is going to continue to get crazier and crazier. And that means I get to be more and more aware of like how I'm spacing my time and honoring my commitments and honoring my relationships with people. that I'm in partnership with. So
Well, just even through the lens of intention, I'm like, I notice like in your language, you're like, my schedule's about to get crazier and crazier and crazier. So if that's your intention, what do you think is going to happen to your schedule?
it's gonna get crazier and crazier and crazier. Well, and I relate to the crazy as like a bad thing, but it's just that
Yeah.
it will be there will be a lot of beautiful things that will be happening during the time that I'm alive.
Yeah. Well, I think you just pointed to like crazy, right? My own through like my reflection of your language will also just got filtered through my definition of crazy. Like my version of crazy is, oh, it must be cluttered, it must be chaotic, it must be all of this. And you could actually relate to crazy as being like beautiful and full of energy and like all of this stuff. So the opportunity to really get clear.
Yeah.
I think sometimes being simple and like very concise in intentional language can make a really big difference. Because in that case, like my interpretation of your word crazy all of a sudden shifted how I related to your schedule, which is going to then paint a picture of how I relate to you and your schedule. So like that's my thing to own in this
That's
moment.
so interesting that you say that. Okay, so I'm gonna swap that word out. I want to say
Okay.
fun. My schedule is gonna
Okay.
get more and more fun because whenever I use the word crazy, people associate it with busy. It's a distancing word, and that's why I don't like
Yep.
it. So it's a
Yeah.
distancing word. It's like, oh, you don't have time. That's what it sounds like. So I'm gonna say fun. My schedule is going to be continuously more and more fun, and then I get to be playful about time and like making sure that there is time for me to source joy within myself. There's time for me to come on the podcast and us to get together and have our conversations and be playful and and work through like all of the things that we need to do on the back end, because this it's not just this, everybody.
We don't just look this
Yeah,
good all the
right.
time.
And then
Well, we do.
being playful. I mean, I woke up like this. And then be playful about like creativity and things like that, which will also be more fun time for me. So it's all fun. Like it's the times when it feels like it's not fun are normally the times when I'm relating to what I am doing to something that I'm like not committed to. So I think it's just about like getting into a space where I'm always aware and connected to like what the vision is, what my vision is, and then set my
And what's your
intention to
vision?
that. Well, I guess my vision is actually that people are connected to their inner power, inner potential, and creating in the world with courage. So I get to do that here and in my writing. It's just so fun.
Nice.
Two
Cool. I love
places.
that. And so that we don't continue to create more breakdowns, we're actually going to be in integrity and start wrapping up here because we have a celebration to get to. We have a 10-minute karaoke event just after this, so we can be in integrity with ourselves and our fun and our play. And so I'd love to start getting this podcast episode 3, wrapped up. And to do that, we're going to just real quick, Jason, you've said a lot, you've already acknowledged a lot, you've already shared a lot of awareness, but like, what's the main thing that you're taking away from this conversation for you?
Main thing, a practice around what I'm committed to and my intention, setting a practice, holding boundaries, creating boundaries with new relationships, which is something I get to look at, and holding most high the relationship I have with the person that I love and respect.
I hope you mean that's you, right?
Yes. Yeah. So those are the things I'm taking away.
Nice.
What are you taking from this conversation?
There was something that that idea around how my I mean, it created a cool conversation, but how my definition of crazy around my interpretation of your calendar or something like that, actually, like I had a negative connotation to that, and how that painted the picture of how I was relating. So I think it's noticing how those words actually shift how I relate to another human being. That is not their highest and best. And I think that the important thing in that, and just like I pointed to you, is it's not just about how I see you. It's not just about how I see other people, but it's actually how I see myself. So my intention here is actually more practices of self-love and letting go of some of the judgment, practicing that from my intention, which is to actually love myself, which I think is actually a pretty beautiful thing. And to be able to do that and like have enough for everybody else too.
More than enough.
So
Spill
yeah,
over.
so much more. Cool. Well, let's get wrapping up so that we can make our little karaoke event here. But everybody that's listening, if you enjoyed what you heard, find us on Instagram at Gentlemen the Podcast. We have a Facebook group. You can search Gentlemen the Podcast on there. We are also on YouTube. So if you're listening to the audio of this on Apple or Spotify, you can find us on our YouTube videos where you get to see all of the faces that we make behind the scenes. And we'll be dropping this episode every single week. If you love what you heard, go on your podcast platform and 5-star rate and review. And feel free to always send us an email if you got something that you'd like to share with us at gentlementhepodcast@gmail.com. Jason, anything before we close out?
No, I just want to ask everyone yes. What's your intention? What's your intention for this week?
Yeah, come share it with us. We'd love to hear it. All right, everybody. We'll see you on the next episode.
Bye. See you next week.